This video will help you measure your valves on page 9 of your packet. The items you will need throughout this page will include your engine block if your valves are still in it, a spring compressor, the appropriate size micrometer, and the appropriate size telescoping or small hole gauge. The first step of page 9 will be to remove your valves from your engine block. For this video, I will be demonstrating how to complete this task on an L-head engine. This video will not be covering the procedures for an overhead valve engine. To begin removing the valves, I will first have to remove the breather assembly from the side of the engine. Next, I will need to check to see which way the valve retainers are situated. For this engine, the valve retainers have an indent to show you which way to move the retainer to allow you to remove the valves. On this engine, I need to have both the indents towards me. If your engine does not have these indents, you will carefully have to inspect the retainers to have the larger part of the center hole situated away from you. With the retainers not properly situated, use a valve spring compressor to compress the valve springs. The trick to using this tool is to start big. Open up the two arms as wide as possible while still fitting over the top of the valve spring and the bottom of the valve retainer. Start with pushing the spring compressor on top of the spring and then under the retainer. Now tighten the two small screws on the spring compressor down so that the tool cannot slip off. With the two small screws tight, slowly and carefully compress the spring by turning the large screw. The goal is to compress the spring as much as possible. Once the spring is fully compressed, move the retainer, spring, and tool away from the engine block. This will allow the valve tip to fit through the big hole on the valve retainer. The valve should now be able to be removed from the block. Here is a side view of how to remove the valves from an L-head engine. With the valve springs, valves, and retainers removed from the engine, it is important to keep the parts organized. As the parts are removed from the engine, place them in two bags. One bag will be for the intake side and a bag for the exhaust side. This will be important for when completing the measurement stages of this page. This video will focus on how to measure your valve face angle, seat face angle, the margin, the seat width, stem diameter, guide diameter, and the spring heights. You will not be able to measure the tappet or valve clearance until your engine is partially back together. Measuring the valve face angle and seat face angle is quite simple. Simply hold the two valve face angles together to see what combined angle they make. The valves for this engine make a 90-degree angle. This means the valve face angle for both valves is 45 degrees. If the valves do not make a 90-degree angle, one or both of your valves could be cut at 60 degrees. For small engines, 45 and 60 degrees valve face angles are the most common. Next, to find the seat face angle, simply add 1 degree to your valve face angle. The seat face angle is always cut at an interference angle to ensure the combustion chamber is properly sealed. Next, each valve's margin will be measured. The margin is the thin, flat area on the valve's head. To measure the margin, simply take a steel rule and measure to the closest 64th of an inch. Here is the measurement for the intake's margin. I'll now do the same thing for the exhaust valve's margin. Here's the results for the exhaust valve's margin. The seat width will also be measured with a steel rule and is located in the engine block. Remember to measure the width of the seat and not the diameter. For the seat width, this measurement will also be measured to the closest 64th of an inch. Here's the measurement for the intake seat width. Now the exhaust seat width has to be measured. Here's the measurement for the exhaust seat width. To begin measuring the valve stem diameter, the proper size micrometer will need to be selected. With the micrometer, simply measure the stem diameter to the thousandths of an inch. Here's the intake stem diameter. Now repeat this process for the exhaust valve's stem diameter. Here is the result for the exhaust valve stem diameter. The next component to measure is the valve guide diameter. The valve guide is where the valve stem rides in the engine block. This measurement will require the use of the proper small hole gauge and micrometer. Here is the measurement for the intake guide diameter. This process will be completed again for the exhaust guide diameter. Here's the readings for the exhaust guide diameter. The last measurement that will be shown during this video is the valve spring height. A micrometer cannot be used for this measurement because a micrometer will collapse the spring as the spindle is screwed towards the anvil. To measure the spring, simply set the spring next to the steel rule and read to the nearest 64th of an inch. Here is the measurement for the intake spring height. This measurement will be completed again on the exhaust spring. Here is the exhaust spring height measurement. All of the measurements for page 9 should now be completed besides the tappet/valve clearance measurements. These measurements will be completed once the engine is partially back together. This now completes page 9 of the small engine reconditioning packet.